Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Oh, I just sneezed. Okay, sorry. Am I apologizing? I don't even know.
First think.
Hi, guys. How did communism reach Cuba? Good question. Really good question, actually. I've never thought about it. Preemptive like, Knowledgia. Great channel, guys. My first video of the day. Sorry if I'm a bit groggy. I mean, it's 3 p.m. I don't know. Okay.
Of the Soviet Union. Maybe the...
The original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Would love to have you. Makes it easier for me to interact with you and see your recommendations. My name's Connor. If you're new, I like to learn about things and watch stuff. Let's go.
When you think of communism, you may first think
Evil.
of the Soviet Union. Maybe the Chinese Communist Party. Possibly Vietnam. Or perhaps Cuba. The latter, though, tends to be a bit more thought-provoking. Of the more prominent communist and socialist countries throughout history, there appears to be a trend of this ideology occurring more so on the eastern side of the globe.
Wait a second. Didn't the U.S. take part in a bunch of coups in South America to... So I'm sure if the U.S. didn't do stuff in South America, there'd be more communist influence in South America. I'm not saying that it was good that we did that. Not very democratic.
On the flip,
We're gonna force you to be democratic. Oxymoron.
occurring more so on the eastern side of the globe. On the flip side, with the United States spending a large chunk of modern history being anti-communist to an extreme, it seems surprising that any state so close to American soil would be able to successfully follow any kind of Marxist ideology. So, how exactly did communism reach the little island so close to the Miami coast and hold on with such an unshakable grip for decades? To understand how Cuba became open to such sweeping reforms as required when turning a country into a communist one, we first need to go back to the very start of the revolutionary era. Prior to independence, Cuba had been under the colonial rule of the Spaniards, who colonized the island throughout the 16th and 17th century. When their Latin American neighbors began to break free from Spain throughout the 19th century, Cuba hesitated to do the same until the end of the 1800s, as dissatisfaction from the natives of the island with the Spanish rule began to grow. This prompted the 10 Years' War between the Kingdom of Spain and the Cuban rebels, which began in 1868 and ended, hinted at by the name, a decade later, though with no freedom for the Cubans. A year later, the Little War broke out between the same belligerents, but it yet again ended in defeat for the rebels. The subsequent Third War of the Revolution started in 1895 and lasted 3 years, with the final year becoming increasingly intense when the United States joined the fight against their Spanish rivals. As a result of the whole debacle, Spain was forced to pull out of Cuba and granted temporary authority over the island to the United States. By 1901, the Constitution of the new Republic of Cuba was created and went into effect the following year, marking the start of an independent Cuba. At first, Cuba's future seemed promising. But as the U.S. sensed growing political tensions and instability, the Platt Amendment was invoked, and the American military intervened in Cuba multiple times over the next 2 decades. This had a damaging effect on the brand new nation and triggered a fresh revolutionary spirit. Amendment was invoked, and the American military intervened in Cuba multiple times over the next 2 decades. This had a damaging effect on the brand new nation and triggered a fresh revolutionary spirit. Throughout the 1930s, this rebellious determination led to the overthrow of the contemporary dictator Gerardo Machado y Morales and the eventual rise of Fulgencio Batista y Saldivar.
Why do Spanish people of Spanish origin have such awesome names? Sorry. I was confused for a second, but I'm good.
led to the overthrow of the contemporary dictator Gerardo Machado y Morales, hence the eventual rise of Fulgencio Batista y Saldívar. Batista's reign came to an end alongside the close of the Second World War and was followed by another period of attempted stability and reform. With Batista's return to power in 1952, turmoil and despair only grew, and once more, the Cubans decided to take matters into their own hands. One of the new rising
What's his name?
revolutionaries was none other than the famed Fidel Castro. Castro was a staunch opponent to the current Batista regime and had already made a name for himself by the age of 30 through his organization and execution of the uprising at the Moncada barracks, which, unfortunately for the young rebel, turned out to be an unanticipated failure. He would soon redeem himself, though, and finally achieve his long-awaited goal in 1959. Batista was out, and Castro was in. As Cubans cheered and praised the victorious revolution that toppled the long-reigning dictatorship of Batista, some opinions about the feisty revolutionary at the heart of it began to harden. Time,
I feel like some people might expect me not to say it, but I have a lot of you know, I'm sure you know they did some bad stuff. So did America. You know, okay. So I don't know everything about these characters, but I do definitely admire countries like Vietnam, standing up to a way more powerful country. It's like Cuba, right on the doorstep. I mean, Vietnam was on the opposite side of the planet, pretty much. Cuba's right there, and though I'm American, I have an enormous amount of respect for anyone that stands up to such an overwhelmingly more powerful country and succeeds in many ways. So definitely some, if not admiration for the man, admiration for standing up, I guess. You know what I mean?
Castro as the vengeful visionary, and quite telling the feisty revolutionary at the heart of it began to harden. Time even referred to Castro as the vengeful visionary, and quite tellingly stated that the executioner's rifle cracked across Cuba last week, and around the world voices hopefully cheering for a new democracy fell still. The men who had just won a popular revolution for old ideals, the democracy, justice, and honest government, themselves picked up the arrogant tools of dictatorship. Of course, this was not necessarily a unanimous opinion, and the US in particular was prone to quickly judging the new leadership, as he himself was strongly anti-American. Early into the Castro regime, his reforms made it apparent to the US government and those supporting it that the powerful rebel was undoubtedly going to be a problem, as Cuba began to expropriate foreign oil company holdings as well as seizing any foreign-owned property, which were often American-owned. It was eventually in 1961 that Cuba officially made its shift to a single-party communist state, and on December 2nd, Castro himself announced in a televised address that, as most had already figured out, he was a Marxist-Leninist. In addition, as the
I'm a Marxist-Leninist and shall be one until the end of my life. Marxism, or scientific socialism, has become the revolutionary movement of the working class.
1960 U.S. embargo on Cuba was proving to be significantly damaging to the Cuban economy. Castro reached out to the USSR for economic assistance. The Soviets had actually already been evaluating Castro and his administration to see if he could potentially be a trusted ally, or if he
It seems like Khrushchev just played Kennedy so easily, okay? I don't get it why JFK is kind of admired as much as he is. I don't get it. Maybe I literally don't get it. Maybe I don't know enough about him. But the main things that... I mean, Khrushchev seemed to... it seems like the U.S. only lost a bit of power under Kennedy, and I think he started the Vietnam, or began the Vietnam War. I don't know enough. Step by step.
Was in America to see if he could potentially be a trusted ally or if he was an American puppet. So when the appeal was made, the Soviets decided to take a leap and agree to a trade deal of Cuban sugar for Soviet fuel. From there, the relationship expanded, although was dampened by the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which Castro felt betrayed by the Soviet diplomacy with the Americans. So, while socialism and communism had made their way around the world in small pockets, including throughout Cuba, it appears that Castro was the root of Cuba truly becoming a communist country. And with that being said, we have one more question to answer. How did Castro become a communist? Unfortunately, there seems to be some inconsistency when trying to find an answer to this question. It appears that in the early years of his rebel days, Castro may have tried to hide his association with communism in hopes of maintaining necessary support throughout the nation. But one author may know the truth nonetheless. According to Saul Landau, writer of Cuba and Its Critics, in a 1968 interview with Fidel Castro, the revolutionary explains that he had been a Marxist from the moment that he read the Communist Manifesto as a student, though he did not specify what level of school he was in. He then added that he had also been a Leninist since reading the works of Vladimir Lenin while imprisoned in the Isle of Pines in 1954.
Guys, I say that's it because like there had to have been something more, surely, than just maybe it happens, but I find it for any just to like read something and be like,
this claim and supposed in the Isle of Pines in 1954. This claim and supposed admission from Castro himself was also supported by Salvador Diaz-Verson, who stated that such archival proof of the same timeline had previously been destroyed. Still, the real point at which Castro decided to embrace the communism ideology is heavily debated, and some even go as far as accusing the ruler's televised announcement in which he declared that he would remain a Marxist-Leninist until his death was purely political and self-fulfilling. Still, Castro's July 16th movement would eventually unite with the pre-existing Cuban Popular Socialist Party and the March 13th Revolutionary Directorate in 1962, which ultimately became the Communist Party of Cuba in 1965.
so was Che Guevara, is that his name? So he was like the Venezuela or Colombia. How are they related?
Today,
You guys can tell how uninformed I am on the subject, obviously.
Communist Party of Cuba in 1965. Today, Cuba classifies itself as a Marxist-Leninist socialist state, and just as those who have come before or alongside them, has remained, technically, in a bit of a limbo between true socialism and true communism. It is true to say that such ideologies had already existed prior to Castro and prior to the Second World War even, with the establishment of the Popular Socialist Party at the start of the 20th century.
Yeah, question, guys. See, I get confused again because I remember like, all right, what is socialism? Looking it up, and there was a Marxist definition of socialism, which Marx saw socialism as the transitory stage between non-communism, whatever form of government is there, to communism. And if you are striving towards communism, then you're a socialist country. That's what you call yourself, because you can't call yourself a communist country if you're not truly communist. And so as you transition to that, that is what is called a socialist government. I believe that's what Karl Marx saw socialism as. Please let me know if I'm wrong.
Technically.
And so it's confusing when they're like the limbo between socialism and communism. Well, I thought that's what socialism Okay.
bit of a limbo between true socialism and true communism. It is true to say that such ideologies had already existed prior to Castro and prior to the Second World War even, with the establishment of the Popular Socialist Party at the start of the 20th century. But it was Fidel Castro who really brought these beliefs to the forefront of Cuban leadership. As stated earlier, we don't exactly know how communism reached Castro, but it was likely done long before he became the revolutionary leader he was. Furthermore, other factors likely contributed to the Cuban people becoming open to the sweeping reforms and changes that any kind of Marxist leadership would bring about. Political instability, corruption, and ironically American intervention over the decades, for example, were all potential contributing factors. And when considering how Marxist-Leninist ideologies even found their way to the western side of the globe at all, that often comes down to the published works of communist revolutionaries themselves. If the Landau interview with Castro is to be believed, then this even proves true for Castro himself. So the answer to how communism reached Cuba and even remains in power through the Communist Party today is not quite a clear one. We don't know exactly who the first Cuban communist was or exactly when Castro first read the manifesto, but we do know that the revolutionary efforts over time and its leaders like Fidel are much to be credited. With the help of the USSR and Castro's eventual power, the Marxist-Leninist government was established and consolidated. But it's important to note that even without Soviet cooperation, Cuba's leading ideology would not have changed, and Castro would have done exactly as he did prior to reaching out to the Soviet Union anyway. While the openness and blatant nature of the communist revolution may have been slightly hidden without such powerful communist support, especially if it is true that Castro first attempted to bury his communist ties and ideas, it seems that with or without the USSR, communism managed to reach Cuba.
Oh, shoot. Really interesting video. Yeah, I thought it was, they might have been more connected to other communist or socialist anti-capitalist movements in Central and South America, and they'd be like the last one standing or something, but it doesn't seem that way. Obviously, it's a short video, so that's all we can tell from that. Nothing wrong with short videos, right? Get your foot in the door as long as you don't form solid conclusions, which I don't think we have. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'd appreciate any and all comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.